Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. And today we're going to discover if wearables can help you optimize your whole health and your nutrition with Torkil Færø. Torkil is actually a physician himself, and he went on a crazy journey where he finally realized that being a physician wasn't solving his own health. It wasn't preventing the issues. And so he had a big transformation himself, and wearables were the tool that he used to massively impact his health. And I'll even say personally, from hearing his story and the way that he utilizes these wearables and how many ways that he uses them, how he tracks all the different brands was super fascinating to me. I thought I would be kind of interested, but I was very impressed with the information that he had to present. It makes me really enticed to get my own wearable. But he has a great story to talk about how he went on his own journey to discover it. And we talk about some amazing strategies that you can utilize these wearables to completely revolutionize how you're living your life. So without further ado, here is Torkil Færø. Good day, Torkil. How are you today, sir?
Thank you. I'm fine. I'm fine here in Norway in the evening, getting towards springtime. Yeah, so it's very nice.
That's awesome. And we were just saying off air, it's cool because my heritage is Norwegian. So it's cool to talk to an actual full-on Norwegian. I don't have any Norwegian like language or anything. The only one that if this is a real Norwegian word, is like upta. Is upta?
Yeah.
What does
like,
upta mean?
That would be like, oh shit, you know.
Okay, yeah. It's the only thing I was ever taught. We didn't know anything else. So I'm pumped to have you here. So, I give a pretty brief intro, but I'd love for you to intro yourself. So why don't you tell people who you are and how you got into doing what you're doing now?
Yes, I'm a Norwegian doctor, a general practitioner, emergency physician, but also an author. I've been writing the Pulse Cure. It's a book on how to use wearables like smartwatches, smart rings, and so on to guide our lifestyle changes and to keep track of our physiology. And so that book has been a huge bestseller in Norway for the last 2 years, almost 2 years and a half. So it's still very busy. So being translated into 7 languages. So it really changed my life. Just doing the tracking changed my health, and my experiences through the books is obviously changing other people's health as well. So it's been a joy because as a doctor we are used to treating diseases after they have developed, right? But this book and these wearables is a part of a preventative strategy to help you stay more fit, more resilient, to avoid getting the lifestyle diseases that is the most common diseases in the doctor's office.
Well, that's the right way to do it. Unfortunately, the healthcare system is, I want to say, almost like, if you think of it evolutionarily, it's playing catch up from years and years and years, right? So it's always been like people get sick, and we've all been playing catch up of treatment. And now we're finally in the age of scientific research where we can say preventative, like we can finally start getting ahead of it. But what's unfortunate for a doctor is still going to be in the treatment stage. Like, that's where you're required. People show up when problems happen. And, I give a lot of credit to doctors where so many people are very critical of, the doctors, they're just treating things. They're just treating them. It's like, that's their fucking job. Like, that's what you got to do, right? But I think it's so great that you're trying to be a part of the movement to get ahead of it, and you're trying to be a part of the solution before it happens, so you see less issues. Now, what made you take that shift? Because, being a physician, it's already a lot of work. Like, it's already a lot on your plate. So I'm curious, at what point in your career did you start to say, hey, I'm really curious about other forms of health, and what led you down that rabbit hole?
Yeah, I was kind of pushed towards it because my father died at 73 from a cancer. And then I could see from my heritage, that none of my forefathers lived to be much more than 70. So I started re-educating myself because I needed to find out how can I live longer than that. And then I found out that there's been so much new research, there's so much new knowledge now about how you can stay healthy, how through lifestyle changes, in exercise, diet, sleep, nutrition, so many things that can give us extra decades, actually, and not just a few years, but decades of extra life where you can still keep your health and keep your brain. So I just changed everything around. I could see in the mirror that I was starting to look like my patient. 40 pounds overweight, did not exercise, did not care about what I was eating. So I just had to turn everything around for my own sake, and for my own interest. So it's just, I was no author. I was not an, authoritative person. I was just a general practitioner. But through finding out more about preventative healthcare, suddenly I'm kind of one of the thought leaders in Norway on how to stay healthy. So it's also been quite a journey for me, in this regard.
Well, that's tremendous that you saw it within yourself. You're like, hey, I got to change myself. I'm 40 pounds overweight. I don't feel good. I feel like the fact that you said, I feel like the patients says a lot, right? Because as we just mentioned, the people who are coming to see you aren't healthy. They're in a bad stage. So how do you feel about that when you look at it? Because it happens a lot in the healthcare industry where you have unhealthy doctors. Like you have doctors that are overweight, they're obese, and they're not taking care of their health. Yet these are somehow supposed to be the highest authority when it comes to health. But again, as we mentioned, more of treatment, not prevention. How do you feel about that when you see doctors not caring about their health?
Yeah, they often have the worst health, or certainly I used to have that. So I used to work a lot of night shifts. It was, of course, uncomfortable. It was painful, downright painful. But I didn't think it was dangerous. If you said to me 15 years ago that you can die from a lack of sleep, it sounded like, alternative medicine or something woo-woo. But of course, now it's well known that if you're underslept, if you sleep less than 6 hours, your chances of getting cancer, doubles. So so much more knowledge now about these lifestyle factors that used to be kind of soft science, so to speak. It wasn't. And maybe I thought as a doctor that if I did everything right, I would maybe live 3 or 4 years longer. But why bother? Because you would need to invest 3 or 4 years to get those extra 3 or 4 years, which would, in my mind, be at the end of your life, at the nursing home. So it was no need to invest much time in the lifestyle. But now, of course, we know that we're talking 20, 24 years of extra time. So
that's a really important image that you hit there, and I think that is super important for people to appreciate. And I really like how you said that, because you've been there. Like I don't know what it's like to be at a certain point in your life and think, is it worth the exercise? Like people struggle with that. People struggle with, the way you said that, it's just like an exchange of years. It's like, I have to put in 3 years of work to get 3 years. Is it worth it to live in a nursing home? No, the big thing that people are missing there is like, well, maybe you don't have to live in a nursing home at the end of your life. And as you mentioned, maybe it's another 10 years of functional living, of being vibrant, being all over the place, living with your grandkids. And I always say that the last few years, like when it's not on your front door, it's not urgent. Like people do not feel the possible pain that will be certain down the road, the last 10 years, because it's just not on their front door. And so, similar to when you had your experience, you're like, it's on my front door. I feel this pain. I feel this problem. And to be able to, make that transition, I think is so important for people to hear it from you, because not only did you make the change, but it wasn't as intuitive for you to do it at a young age. You had to do it and to go out of your way. I really love that you highlight the importance of sleep too. Like honestly, this is actually, I think, one of the later fitness and health movements, because when I was like early 20s, that's, not that many years ago, I'm 37 now, so we're talking about 10 to 15 years ago, people were into the hustle culture of no sleep, team no sleep. Like it was getting up at 4 a.m., 3 a.m. You're a badass if you're doing it. Now, finally, it's like, no, like be selfish with your sleep because it's as important as the exercise and everything. The one that you really said there that was so important, like the fact that the healthcare professionals, the doctors, the nurses, the firefighters, the police, the ambulance, all these people who, by the way, our healthcare system relies on to keep us alive, we are making them suffer with poor sleep habits. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Matt Walker's book.
Sure.
Well, his story about a doctor who was a surgeon who ended up back at the same surgery table the same day because he got in a car accident from being sleep deprived. And when you talk about these things that you wouldn't believe it until they actually prove it, the idea that being sleep deprived is as risky, if not more risky, than being drunk on the road because you're unconscious. Like these things were not known in the culture. So I love that you made this transition. So let's keep going down this path. I'd love to hear the story of the transition. I think when people go through the transitions, it's very important for other people who haven't fully transitioned to appreciate the highlighted notes, the difficult things you have to overcome, but the things that help motivate you and the things that help push you to the new lifestyle. What were some things that, as you took this journey to rediscover your health, that really made an impact for you?
Well, probably the first thing that really made an impact was quitting alcohol. I used to drink, 2 glasses of wine every evening, and that was recommended by doctors. It was doctor's orders, so to speak. Finally, a good one, right? And starting to use the wearables, you could obviously see that having alcohol is terrible for your stress balance. It affects the heart rate. You wake up in the morning, you're tired. And so just quitting alcohol just gave me a lot more energy and feeling refreshed in the morning. So that was a big thing. And other than that, I could see from the wearables that a lot of food will stress us. So ultra-processed food, flour-based food like bread and cakes and all of these things will have a stress effect on my body. And eating late in the evening would stress my body. So when I started to get insight into the stress balance, I could adjust it, and that was motivating to see on the wearable that if I do this, okay, then I can see the result in the heart rate and I will feel better. And so that was much of the motivating thing for me.
That's huge, right? Because it's data. It's solid.
It's data, yeah.
It's objective, right? It's not subjective. Super important to have data. I always say you have to track your way to success. You can't guess there. I really love that you highlighted the drinking, and it was funny because, and it was from a colleague of mine that was talking about a wearable. We were at a dinner, and these 3 other guys who are all doing great in business and in life. I was the only one drinking, and they're all doing better than me in business. I'm like, oh man, I should question this. And it was actually from the one friend that had an Oura ring, and he said, yeah, man, if I have one drink, it shows up on the Oura ring. Like I know I'm not as rested. And I'm like, shit, I didn't know that one drink was actually doing that much. And so it was funny because then anytime I was and not that I was drinking a ton, actually, I still was drinking a lot less, but it weighed on me to realize what's the cost of 1 or 2 drinks, even if it's 1 or 2 here and there, like what's the weight of it? Well, it's your sleep. And like sleep has been a long battle for me over the last 10 years to be trying to feel more optimal throughout the day. And one of the things people always struggle with is like, oh man, not enough time in the day. I have so many things to do. Well, if you're not getting enough sleep because you're not going to sleep rested enough, everything you do in the day, you're less efficient on. So you're having less time in the day because you're less efficient throughout the day. Your task timing takes longer. So I really love that you're pointing out, especially because it was this idea, and there was data to suggest like a drink a day of red wine was showing some correlation to lower blood pressure, right? And this is the unfortunate thing about the scientific process, is that it's a process. It takes time. And now more research comes out and it's like, yeah, that wasn't a good idea. I don't think you should be drinking every day. And so now people are starting to see it. And I think it's cool that we're in a culture I'm seeing it in, Canada, where it's like, hey, if you don't want to drink, you're not a weird person. Like, there's only a handful of people where it's like, not drinking. And they'll be like, oh, is there something wrong? But now it's like, you're not drinking? Okay. So people just don't drink now. And it's become more culturally appropriate. But let's dive into the wearables, because this is the big thing. This is the big topic. And you said it made a big shift for you. I'm curious what wearables you explored. What was the first kind of tracking data that really caught your attention?
Yeah, the first device I used was a ECG-based monitor that I was, attaching to my chest with a tape, and I used it for 2 years until I understood that Garmin had the same system in their watches. And then, of course, it's so much easier to use a watch than using the system. You have to put this thing on and off, several times during the week. So I saw that Garmin had the same system. So now I actually have the Garmin watch. I have the Oura ring. I have a Samsung ring. I have a Norwegian Inspire ring and a Whoop band. That is because it's my job, to keep track and compare the different wearables and find out, what would be suitable for different people. It's it's all developing quite fast. So the software is being updated. So it all changes almost month by month. But I started out with a ECG monitor and then went over to these other kind of trackers. I must say that when I'm talking about micromanaging the stress levels, like on an hourly basis, that would be the Garmin watch. That's the only option if you want to do that. The other wearables like the Oura ring will give you a reading in the morning, they have some rudimentary stress levels during the day, but not as precise and as useful as the Garmin system will give you.
That's cool. It's good to know that you're, like I say, I totally respect that the way you said that. It's like you have all these different wearables that you have, but you also preface to say, hey, it's my job to know how well these work and why they work. It's like, you probably don't need all of them, right? But it is really interesting that there are different benefits to the different brands. And let's dive into a little bit why the EKG is a little bit important. So what is it about that is important data? Like, how do people pick up, like, you use that first form of it. How do you use that data to help you improve some of your fitness in your life?
Yeah, so what these devices do is they track the heart rate variability. So it's quite important to know what heart rate variability is. And I didn't know that as a doctor until 6 years ago, and I think probably most doctors still don't know what it is. But the heart rate variability will give you an estimate of the state of your autonomic nervous system. The nervous system that is at the bottom of our brains that we share with all vertebrates, all mammals. It's an ancient system, like hundreds of millions of years old, and it still works pretty much in the same way. And it's very essential to have a good balance in this system to have a good health. So this system is divided into two parts: the fight, flight, and freeze, the sympathetic nervous system, the survival system that, raises your heart rate, gives you adrenaline, cortisol. It will help you to hunt down whatever you want to eat, and it will help you to flee from anyone that wants to eat you. And so that is kind of the on system. But there's also an off system, the rest and digest system, the parasympathetic mode. And that is where recovery happens for the most of the time. And you need to be in this recovery state most of the day. That is what we are constructed for, evolutionary. And the heart rate will reveal whether we are in the stress state or in the restful state. Because when we are in the restful state, there will be a good variation between the heartbeats. When I breathe in the restful state, the heart rate goes up a little bit, and because there's more oxygen in the lungs. And when I breathe out and there's less oxygen, then the heart rate, slows down just a little bit, measured in milliseconds. But these wearables can detect that, and through comparison with millions of users and artificial intelligence, that will give you an estimate of the balance of your stress system, whether it's sustainable with good health or not over time. Because it's when this stress system is in a poor balance, overloaded, that is when there's not enough energy, or the immune system is not prioritized enough, so it will give way to all of the lifestyle diseases that we are struggling with.
I see. So the heart rate variability fundamentally is going to show you your ability to go from one to the other, and especially to bring it down to that parasympathetic, because so many people are commonly overstressed. They're having things like you say, alcohol, poor sleep, poor nutrition, that could be actually stimulating their sympathetic nervous system and making their immune system having to work overload. And fundamentally, that's why they're feeling terrible. They're not getting recovery and stuff like that. Is that kind of
exactly?
That's really cool. And so you started to explore that just with an EKG, and then you found the wearables. And now, what was your next wearable that you said, I think it was Garmin you got into?
The Garmin, yeah, and then the Aura, and it all depends on how intrusive you want this to be, So if you have the Aura ring, you'll get a message in the morning, are you recovered or not? And that's pretty much it. And as long as you have a good enough stress balance, that would probably be good enough for most people. But if you find out that you're struggling, you have symptoms, then you would probably want to have the Garmin watch, which would give you, both in the moment and throughout the day, more accurate reading of the stress level, so you can identify that it was the pizza you ate, at 8 o'clock yesterday. That is where the stress happened. With like the Aura ring, you wouldn't be able to detect things like that. So to detangle, to do the detective work of what is affecting your stress balance, then you would need the Garmin. So I often compare it to if you go to the supermarket and you do a big shopping, and that you only get the total on your bill. You don't know what the different items costed, So this is how you can see, okay, a meeting with this colleague stresses me this much, with this other colleague, doesn't stress me that much, and so on. So it makes it more actionable to maneuver. So and these are kind of dashboards to your physiology. So it's a way to be able to see the load on your system in real time.
That's really cool, and really good to know the detailed difference, that the Aura ring is more simplistic and then Garmin has a much more detailed view. So do you feel like there are still some people that the Aura ring is sufficient? Is the Garmin like way more expensive, so some people could just do the Aura ring? Is kind of
No, the Garmin would be cheaper.
Interesting.
It would probably be almost half price, or the cheapest good enough Garmin watch is probably somewhere around the half price of the Aura ring. I would estimate, at least in Norway.
Wow. So then what would be the benefit to, if it's cheaper, is the Aura ring just because it's like less, like you don't need the excessive detail? Like if you're paying more, I'm just trying to understand the benefit to using the Aura ring then.
I don't know.
Not wanting to wear a wristwatch, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. So, and a lot of people want to still have their Apple Watch, which is not good enough, or they would have an analog watch or no watch, and they would rather have a ring. So that would be a good reason. So, and some people would be too obsessed about the numbers they get, so they would not want to have these numbers available at all times, So. Yeah. So it all depends. So there would be different devices that will suit different persons. So I think they're all good. They're all a lot better than just guesswork.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad that you highlighted that people get too obsessive, because I've even heard of issues, I'm not sure if they call it a straight up like syndrome, but where people would be so obsessed with their sleep score, it reduces their sleep. Like they actually are so worried about it. And then you're trying to benefit from using this wearable and tracking it, that looking at it right away in the first thing in the morning is actually they're too anxious about it. They're too obsessed over it. So I think that's a really important thing. Do you work with people or like talk to people about like when they're doing too much tracking?
Yeah, I meet sometimes, or most often, I hear people referring to that they have heard of other people who have experienced it. So I rarely become in direct contact with people who have experienced that. So I think that it would probably be like around 10% of the people using the watches and devices that would have this kind of a problem. And all good medicine, will have some side effects.
Right.
So that may be one of them. But in general, it should be a way to see that, okay, you have a problem dealing with things, because often the same people that have a problem dealing with the data that they get, they have the same problem regarding other factors in life. So they could use this as an opportunity to relate to it in a better way. And the way that I prefer to use it is just like in your car. You're having your dashboard, you're not staring at your dashboard. You're just checking that your speed is okay and within, more or less within the good limit, and that you have enough gas left on the tank, that the temperature of the engine is okay, and, the different data that you get from the dashboard. So, and this is how you should use these wearables as well. And maybe sometimes during the day, you can see your, like on the Garmin watch, you can push a button, like I can do right now, and see the stress levels and see the heart rate, and that you could do, sometimes during the day, just to explore how much does this situation affect my stress levels, and you would get surprises. Most people get surprises because what affects your stress levels is not necessarily what we traditionally regard as stress. Being busy, having, some anxiety, having some troubles at work or in your family life. It is the food that we eat. It's the alcohol. It's the lack of sleep. It's the lack of exercise or too much exercise. For women, it would be the menstrual cycle. The week before menstruation is a physiological, visible load on your system. And once you start to see the stress levels, you're able to mitigate. What you can measure, you can manage. So it's easier to be able to see how much a certain activity will affect your stress balance.
Yeah, I really love that. I love the sentiment, what gets measured gets managed. I think it's a very, it's a scientific way, it's an objective way, and it generally does actually help people. Some people are so far the other way that they're afraid of tracking. And there's so much more empowerment when you realize you can put a number to something. But just like you said, and I love how you highlighted it, is that you know people who know people that had the problem, which means it's not a high percentage. And just like any good medicine, it's like, well, training is great, and there's people who overtrain. There, diet can be great. There's people who have obsessive diets,
and some even die of exercise. They're running in the woods and they get a heart attack. So everything have a certain side effect to it. So yeah.
Absolutely. And just the idea that you just want enough data. Your analogy of looking at the dashboard is perfect. It's like, you got to know your speed if you don't want to go over the speed limit. Like, it just makes sense. So if you're trying to not go over the speed limit for your recovery, that's why you could use that gauge the exact same way. I think that's really super to hear. Now, let's talk about the triggers. You talked about a few of them. Do you see it being heavily individualized as far as the food? Are there some red flags that come up quite often with the food? What's your recommendation for people to look at?
Yeah, so it's mostly the same things that will affect different people, but maybe in a different, power, so to speak. So some people will tolerate alcohol better than others. Some people will tolerate eating gluten or milk better than others. Most people react poorly to sugars, to ultra processed food, and then particularly the hyper palatable processed food, the ones you find, the snacks and candy that you find by the end of the supermarket when you're too tired to resist, right? That would be the most common ones, and of course alcohol. And you will see that there will be a big individuality, so you will find out how your system works. And that's very important, because most of the time we as doctors, we refer to research studies where you will get an average of how people respond to a certain thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything to you on an individual basis. So here you have the control of your system. And it's actually quite a big shift in the mentality, that you take the power from the healthcare system, from the doctor that usually is in control of your data, and puts it literally into your own hands so that you have the control. So for me, in my mind, this is as important for the modern stress-related diseases as antibiotics and vaccines are for the kind of the old diseases, like infectious diseases and so on.
I think that's a great way to look at it, especially when you mention the power. It gives you the power. I think this is a really important thing from the individuality perspective. And it's true that when you look at any sort of nutritional and fitness research, it's always on average. So this is where it gets really confusing with social media, because someone will be like, oh, I went vegan and I was way better. Oh, I went carnivore and I was way better. These individual stories become confusing, because then when you look at the data, on average, these things don't work out for a lot of people. So then what do we believe? Because we're an individual, we don't know if we're average or on the far end of the spectrum, especially when it comes to what I think is one of the most important nutrition movements, and that is dealing with autoimmune issues, because autoimmune issues are very unique. They are very individualized, and they're not well researched because they tend to be a certain percentage of the population. So I've been excited to see something come forward with more data. It looks like there's a bit of a solution here. And I feel like you could probably see this, where someone, like you mentioned, gluten, where on paper, the only thing I'd say on research, when you look at people who talk more about, they're totally evidence-based, and it's like, if you have celiacs, it makes sense. If you don't have celiacs, you should be fine. It's like, well, maybe it's a spectrum. Maybe there's some people who, like, I'll say myself personally, I definitely don't have celiacs. But if I have a lot of heavily processed, or bread, pizza, processed gluten, I don't feel as good as if I don't have it and have carbs from other sources. Like, I feel better not having it. So I have it occasionally, but not a lot. And I just know that that is a processed food. But there isn't necessarily, without getting these, what is, I think, a newer age of food intervention, with some blood tests, some naturopaths are trying to do more of what they call functional medicine, right? And they say, hey, we're going to remove this, this, and this. But I've been waiting to see more solid data on it. And I feel like you're a big part of the solution with this, because it's really expensive to go get a blood test all the time. And what blood test do you trust? Because this is still new research. Do you kind of see that part of the movement as far as like the nutritional interventions, with being like, it's a problem for primary care, like for physicians, but at the same time, who do you trust when it comes to, do you have an autoimmune issue with these foods?
Yeah, because you will see that immediately. Like, I had a pizza some days ago, and you could immediately see that the stress level gets really high, and it will last for like 6-7 hours, something that I would never have thought of. So the heart rate will, and I don't have celiac disease, but I tolerate gluten poorly, and it becomes obvious in the heart rate that will respond to this inflammation that happens in my gut because of the pizza. And of course, then it's easier and more motivating for me to stay away from it. And then, of course, sometimes you fall for the temptation to have it, or you don't have any way around it. Everybody's around you eating a pizza, and you want to do it as well. But at least you know the physiological price of the pizza. So and earlier I used to eat pizza just like the go-to food, easy, just put in the oven, and of course now that I have the data, then I stay away from it as much as I can.
That's the big thing. It's the motivation. It's seeing the objective consequence. And I've had clients where you try to get them to eat more whole foods, staying away from the processed. And I don't say people have to, but I recommend they do an elimination style diet where we remove any of that processed food. And some people could be having pasta and gluten and feel nothing, or very, very minimal, right? But there's a good percentage of people who don't digest it well. And how do you know you're that person? Take it out for a while, reintroduce it. And I'll have individuals where when they do the elimination style of diet that we set up for them, they lose weight, they feel good, but then it starts creeping into the old habits. And then they're saying, I'm not feeling good. Maybe I need to see a naturopath. And I'm like, okay, well, what foods are you eating? And it's not the whole foods. You're eating the processed foods again. I'm like, well, how'd you feel when you ate the diet we set up for you? And they'll say, I actually felt pretty good. And so, and I had an individual where it only when he got the data that is like, hey, you need to change this or you have this symptom. And that was the reinforcement. Like you need a heavy amount of data sometimes to be like, this is for sure doing the thing that you don't want it to do. As you mentioned, I love that you're realistic about it too, because you're not saying that it's like you can't have the pizza. You're going to be in situations where, we had Easter coming up here. I'm going to eat some processed food that will probably elevate my heart rate. That's Easter. That's just what it happens occasionally. But when you're having pizza on a Wednesday, just because that's what you usually do on Wednesdays and Tuesdays and Fridays, like that's where it's going to start adding up and it's going to start costing you. So you can at least make a more objective, impression or make a more objective call. Now I'm curious because this data seems very important, especially I wouldn't have considered it such an important thing for nutrition. What other things should people look at for the wearables as far as how it's impacting them? What other data can they use?
I would use the wearables to track the movement, to track if you're exercising enough, to track your VO2 max, to see if your fitness level is in an optimal state or good enough state. It doesn't need to be optimal really, but to make sure that your VO2 max is not in the lower quarter, that is where most of the disease happens. And VO2 max is a measure of the efficiency of your cells, of your mitochondria, of your metabolism of energy. And if that is poor, your body is all the time struggling in overdrive just to keep, the processes going, and you don't have any reserve capacity. Once you start exercising and getting into a better fitness, you have a reserve so that your body is working, like on a low gear and producing the same speed, if you have the car analogy. So that is some of the most useful data that you get out of the watches, at least the Garmin watches.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I guess and we'll talk about the different types of wearables as I've just used the Fitbit, but the Garmin, and I'm assuming maybe the Oura as well, they can predict roughly where your VO2 max might be based on your exercise tolerance essentially.
Absolutely. Yeah. I did not trust the Oura one. I see that it's lower for me than on the Garmin, and I have done the treadmill test and saw that the Garmin one is very precise. It was just like half a point off. So it's probably but the Garmin watches are geared towards people that exercise, like runners and people who exercise, and the Oura is better for sleep. So the Oura would be better for an estimate of the sleep phases and the sleep quality. So they have their different strengths. I know Matthew Walker that you referred to, he's an Oura guy. So so they're kind of developed to optimize sleep. And I can see that my Oura ring would give me a better score for the recovery state, because the heart rate variability would be like one of 8 different factors. While on the Garmin watch, for the body battery system, the heart rate variability is like probably more than 50% of the value. So they all emphasize different parts of the data that they collect. So, but the bottom line is that from the data that you get the pattern of movement, you get the temperature, the oxygen level in the blood, and the heart rate variability. And from those measurements, these devices can tell us so much about what happens in our body that we are really not equipped to feel or sense. So the sense of our inner state has always been down prioritized because we have excellent eyesight, hearing, touch, smell, because historically all the threats came from the outside, other animals, enemies, foul food, and you would have to smell if something is approaching you, and if you were too, if you felt too much of your inner stress levels, that would make it harder to get the sensations from the outside world, and it would put you in danger. So a lot of people say, okay, why should we listen to our heart rate? We can just feel it, but we really can't do that. We haven't developed that sense, and it's been also almost muted to give way to the senses to the outside.
I love that kind of depiction. The threat used to come from the outside, and it's now coming from the inside, and we don't know the information that you need. I think that's a really good way to put it, that people need to appreciate what we're doing to ourselves is causing the inside of us to actually beat ourselves up. That's that autoimmune issue. That's that fight or flight response. I think that's awesome that you put it that way. And just to be clear, when you do the Oura Ring or the Garmin, were you doing an actual VO2 max test, or can people just do an aerobic workout and get a sense of it? Or should they still do a max effort test in order to know roughly where their VO2 max test, their VO2 is?
I think that with the Garmin watches, it's accurate enough so that you don't need to do the treadmill test yourself. So because the VO2 max is, I think it's pretty easy to calculate from how fast will you move a certain distance and what will your heart rate be. And then compared with, the data that they have collected, throughout the years, they will be able to predict that value pretty well. Nowadays that I see so many people, I can almost look at a person and see the VO2 max level that they have.
Wow.
So it seems to be very accurate. It's very rare that a person in a certain fitness state will give me a surprise, that it looks very fit and then have a poor VO2 max or so. So it seems to be pretty consistent.
Yeah, I've been mainly just paying attention to resting heart rate because it's such a good indication of your VO2 max, and just knowing when I've done less aerobic, my resting heart rate, it's not bad, but it should be lower for being a trainer. And then I've been surprised by others, is my colleague there who has an Oura Ring, and he's, bear in mind, like he's not a fit guy. Like he exercises. I train way more, but I do a lot more strength training, and I was quite impressed because him to try to get down to my body fat percentage was a struggle, because he's just naturally trying to get around to 13%. He said that was unsustainable for him. And then for me to be around 13-14% is the easiest body fat percentage for me. He walks around 20 to 22% body fat, and his resting heart rate is like 42 beats per minute. And I'm like, that is elite level. Like, that is really good. And it's because he's doing zone 2 every day. And so that's where I'm kind of surprised, and that's where I really team up the resting heart rate. But it would be really good to know if you can correlate it to all of the data. And especially because I do work with athletes, is I've been looking for more tangible ways and useful ways to be able to get athletes to track their heart rate. I had this guy, Don Moxley, on here. He had recommended to have a heart rate, because especially he recommended the Polar for like a strap for high intensity. And that's what I was going to ask you was, is the Garmin still effective for high intensity? I know with my Fitbit, not really effective for high intensity, because I find like maybe it's because it moves so much. It doesn't pick up on the variability because it goes from high to low quickly. Like, do you see that the Garmin is still effective for the sport type or high intensity things that go up and down when you're doing exercise?
I think you need a chest strap, regardless. I don't think Often it's good enough, so if I forget the chest strap, most of the time it will be good enough when I'm running. But to be really sure, if you're an athlete, I think you need the chest strap, and particularly for like vigorous training where you're moving your arm a lot, it seems to be hard to track it. They will often, if you're running, it will suddenly it will show your cadence instead of your heart rate, and yeah. So I would use this chest strap on all of these devices. So
that makes sense. Yeah. So then let's talk about, because we mostly talked about the Oura Ring and the Garmin. Now, again, I did say I have the humble Fitbit. I'm curious of your overall view of like the Fitbit, Apple Watch, or any of these more simplified wearables. Like usable? Do you think they're still okay for people starting out, or do you think like where's your feeling on most of those?
Yeah, I was quite happy with the Fitbit. I was using it for a time too. I was not really happy with the Apple Watch. It didn't seem to be accurate enough. It didn't seem to have a good enough apps for the for the software. That was probably more the problem. So unfortunately, because Apple is like 30% of the market or so, and Garmin is down probably at 5 or 10%. So it would be nice if Apple had a good way to measure this, but I think the most close app would be an app called Athletic, the combination between athlete and analytic. That seems to be okay, but it doesn't come close to the Garmin, unfortunately.
That makes sense. Yeah, like you say, they just really nail it down. And Garmin's very popular with the marathon runners, more people doing long distance stuff. So they really hone
And they're
in.
good. Yeah, and they're good at estimating the need for recovery after a certain exercise, and I think most people would be surprised of the need for recovery from a hard workout, with a high maximum heart rate compared to a zone 2 training. It's like you could run for an hour and a half or two with a zone 2 training and have like 24 hours recovery time. And when I do the VO2 max test, that you're running as hard as you can for 8 minutes, it would give me 4 days, 96 hours of recovery. So working at the maximum speed is very, very costly to the recovery time. So, and if you have a poor VO2 max level, you can tolerate, disappointingly low intensity. So, and that is probably why a lot of people will be discouraged, because they train at an intensity level that they would think is okay, but it's way too hard for them. Their body is really struggling. They get inflammation, they feel bad, and then they train even more and they feel even worse, and they give up because it's just too hard. So I think most people, if they have a VO2 max of less than 35, they should start training ridiculously low intensity.
That's the really mind-boggling thing for people who are really ambitious, is that, hey, guess what? The more frequent you do low intensity stuff, the better it is. Like the zone 2 has made such a comeback. It was a really big thing for fat loss, about 10 to 20 years ago. That was the way that, like, it's mostly just aerobic. And then people were like, oh no, high intensity is the way, you burn more calories in it. And that was a big movement when I got into training. And then we're like, actually, that's a really bad message for people thinking they should do high intensity interval training every day. Terrible message. As you just mentioned, 4 days to see recovery on the Garmin. When I was talking to Don Moxley, who's a strength coach, he said he couldn't get athletes to produce the same power and force for 7 to 10 days. So it's like we get caught up, and is what Don points out, is like we get caught up in feeling it. And so somewhere between, like, whether it's the high intensity stuff, but for sure zone 3 and 4, when people are just going for a hard run, when people are playing their sport, like it's kind of like sport intensity, it is where the adrenaline system is so rampant. So you think you're doing the good job, right? And let's bear in mind, one of the most introductory mantras that people adopt when they get into training and fitness is no pain, no gain. And it's like, the message is just the right amount of discomfort for a long period of time is ironically what you need, which is the most fucking boring answer that people can hear, and they think that can't work. But I'll just go back to the example of my colleague there that can do 42 beats per minute just by doing zone 2 cardio every day. Like, you can do it, and it's so amazing that you can do it so repetitively, and it has such an impact. And especially because, from my understanding, it's what increases the mitochondria density. It works the aerobic system specifically without, like you say, the issues of the inflammation, the issues of all the high intensity force. Whereas it's almost like I always tell people, if you wanted to work specifically a muscle group, you do that specific exercise, right? So it's like, I really want to work my chest. So you're going to do just a chest fly. That's all I want to work. Okay, well, what if I go really hard and I want to work my chest, my triceps and shoulders, but you said you just want to work on your chest. So you just do that specific exercise. And that's kind of what zone 2 is. If we want to work just specifically the aerobic system, that's how you bring it up. And I think that's really good to hear. It's also good to hear that, people can use these other apps, these other different tracking systems that, still can help. I'm curious how you feel about the Fitbit or even the Apple Watch, although most people don't wear their Apple Watch at night. I use my Fitbit at night. How do you feel about that as far as sleep tracking?
I think the Fitbit was okay on sleep tracking. Yeah. It's probably a year since I used it, but I felt that Fitbit was a good choice. So probably comparable to like the Oura Ring or one of the rings. Yeah,
that's good. And I still feel like, as it is to some degree, depending on what model of the Fitbit that you have, it's still relatively early in the development of understanding sleep and the impact it has. So it's like, if it says I had a good score and I don't feel good, I don't always read into it. And if it says I had a bad score and I feel good, that's where I still feel like we can make subjective calls. And I'm curious, with all the tracking that you do you still have moments where you're like, this tracking data doesn't add up to my subjective experience, and I feel better than what it's telling me I should feel? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, sometimes. What's a bit hard is that how you feel when you wake up is not necessarily a measure of how well you have been sleeping throughout the night. Because you could be waking from a light sleep phase and then you feel better. If you wake up, with your alarm watch from a REM sleep, you will feel more groggy. So it's better to wait 1 hour after you have been waking up, and then it's easier to assess how well your sleep has been. And you will have two different factors on the sleep quality. So you will have the heart rate variability, which will tell you how well you have been recovering physiologically, so to speak, throughout the night. And this is a factor that is less tangible. It's less easy to feel that. But the sleep phases, whether you have been going through the right sleep phases and have been sleeping enough time, that is more effect on your clarity of your mind, so to speak, or how refreshed that you feel. But both of those things are important. So there can be a mix, but usually it's to me at least it seems to be usually the numbers that I get fits with how I feel. It's very rarely that it doesn't.
Well, I mean, you got 5 wearables on right now, so I feel like you got enough data to support your feeling. But that's a really interesting idea. And I remember hearing this before. This is actually before Fitbits and everything. One of the first one, Nike had one, and I can't remember what it was called, but they had actually intentionally tried to come up with this idea. And it goes into what you mentioned about coming out of a light sleep. They actually tried to give a vibration to you to almost slightly wake you up and prepare you to go into light sleep. So is that like a bit of a method that you've seen work for people, where they come to get themselves into a light sleep and out of a deep sleep? So then 45 minutes to an hour prior to your actual wake up time, you have like a subtle cue to partially take you out of that. And then when you actually have your real wake up time, you feel a little better. Is that a tactic that people can use?
I think that the Whoop band has this kind of a system that it will wake you up, with a vibration at a good time to wake up, when it comes to the sleep phase. So, but I think it's the only one that, to my knowledge, can do that. So, usually I try to wake up of myself, without using an alarm watch, so I can, I can usually don't have to use an alarm to wake up. And what's nice about the Garmin watch, I think, is that it wakes you with the vibration and not the sound.
Mm.
And it also makes it possible for you to connect it to your phone so that your phone doesn't ring. It just gives a vibration, So because if I hear the phone ringing, it's much more stressful for me, at least, than just having this vibration on my wrist.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and you mentioned the Whoop there, because we haven't talked about the Whoop much. Now, would you put that kind of comparable to Garmin or Oura? Would you say it's
Yeah.
as good up there?
I would say so. And what is great about the Whoop band is that also it doesn't have any screen. It's like a bracelet, and it will give you a recovery score in the morning, whether you're like in the green or yellow or red, and it will give you a strain that will increase, as your day passes by, to see if your strain is, how it will compare to your recovery. And you will get a weekly and monthly report, and every day, every morning, you will have a journal that you check off what you have been doing the day before. And their algorithms and artificial intelligence will give you an estimate of what will affect your stress levels. So I think that's a very good option too. And I know many athletes use it. And Cristiano Ronaldo, I'm not sure if you're into soccer, but the soccer player Cristiano Ronaldo, he uses the Whoop band and says it's like having a doctor on his wrist. And by the way, he also has logs cold baths, cold plunges, that he will have more than 200 of them through of the days with cold plunges. And that is also motivating for me to see that the cold shower and the cold plunge will calm down and put me into the parasympathetic state, because the cold is very uncomfortable, but it will put me into it will get the inflammation down and put me into the parasympathetic mode, which of course is why all the athletes use the colds to, put the inflammation caused by their exercise, and put that down.
Yeah, that's really cool data. And again, really cool that we see so many of these new technologies coming out. I think it's a new age, and you got athletes that can use it for recovery. Someone has a sport, they're trying to use it for recovery. You have health goals. And then this nutrition side that you hit on, I think that's just so cool because like you mentioned, we now have more of our health within our control. I got just two more questions. One, I think might be a challenging one. Because this is your job and you're so invested in it right now, do you think that you're going to keep tracking the rest of your life, or do you think that this is just, and some people might, like, I mean, you're interested in it. Like I track calories all the time. Am I always going to? I don't know. I just know that's who I am right now. And so I just was curious how you feel about it, because it's such an interest. So it's hard for you to answer that question, but I'm really curious how you feel about it.
I think I will always track it, yes.
Yeah.
Right now, I also track my blood sugar with a EGM. So I do that only occasionally, just to remind me what happens to the blood sugar and to keep it, at a fair level. But the tracking, yeah, it's like I like having this dashboard to my physiology. So to me, it's just an interesting thing. And to see how different things affect it, and just like I like to have the dashboard in the car, I like to have it on my own physiology. So I think now it's just second nature. I don't even think about it. It's not usually. I just check it in the morning. Check it sometimes during the day. It's not. It's not disturbing me anyway.
Yeah. And like you say, you're curious. I don't even think, because I have a Fitbit mostly, honestly, to track steps. But now I started to realize, because sometimes especially recently, my strap is about to break. I'm like, hey, if I don't have it, what happens? I know how to get my steps. Like, it's not even a question. I know my routine. I've watched it for the last like several months. So I know I'm getting my steps. It's not the issue. The only other reason I'm like, I like to be able to tell time on my watch, and it feels good to see the data. Like, it's like, hey, I got that many steps today. I was pretty sure I was get that, but it feels good. And the same thing with calorie tracking. There's days where I don't track, but sometimes I'm curious. Sometimes it's just like, hey, what's in this? What am I doing here? And when you have curiosity, it's motivating inherently to itself. And I feel like that's what more people need, is they need to be curious with their health, because when you mention it, you get to have that power of controlling your health better. So let's finish off with one last question, as this is a Strong Ambition podcast. What is your most recent ambition? It could be professional, personal, anything. What are you really excited coming down the pipeline?
That is quite clear, because I'm writing a book now on sun exposure.
Cool.
Because the sun, we've been scared away from the sun using sunscreen, and now we know so much about the effects of sun exposure on our health that is really healthy. And of course, the solar energy, we're like walking solar panels, right? Our cells, our mitochondria are using the energy from the sun, both the UV light and the visible light and the infrared light, to improve the energy, the metabolism in our cells, and producing lots of hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, melatonin, nitric oxide, of course, vitamin D. So I'm writing a book now on how can we use the sun for maximum health benefits. So that's a really, really interesting area. The sun is free, of course, available for everyone. And I'm looking so much forward to that, and I hope it can really help many people, because there's no easier biohack than going outside, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's that's the lowest hanging fruit you could ever imagine, and the paradox is that we have been advised, from us doctors, to stay away from the sun, and it's how this came to be. I'm curious, because the research now, the data is so clear that it will reduce heart disease, it will reduce cancer of all causes, it will reduce a lot of autoimmune diseases. So that is my project for the next 9 months, until it's hopefully released in Norway in January. So I have high hopes for that one.
I'm really excited about that one, and especially because my girl is terrified of the sun from me, because she's Filipino, so she's got a darker complexion. She's worried about my fair skin, and we live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, so it's like we don't get much sun in the winter at all. And I've never burnt too bad easily. And I've always been cautious of hey, I don't want to get burnt. I can't imagine that's good for the skin. But I've also not been hyper paranoid. Oh, I got to wear sunscreen, got to wear it. And so we debate it a lot, especially recently. So when you finish this book, I want to have you on again. I want to talk about that, because this is the exact data that I would expect. No one's encouraging you to go burn your skin from the sun. But there's got to be a level of sun exposure that is healthy. There has to be, because we're humans and we were evolved through it. So it only makes sense that there's a capacity. And again, as we mentioned, individual basis, right? So clearly with the paleness of my skin compared to hers, I can tolerate less sun than her. But I totally agree. And I'm really excited to hear how that book goes. When that book's done, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to dive into it, because I think this is important information, and it probably has nuance where it's it doesn't mean you have to go out there every single day to get burned. but there's going to be a level that you can tolerate, and that's going to literally benefit your health, as you mentioned, hormone and all that stuff. So let's definitely reach out when we go to do that, when you finish that book in the future. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Torkil. I love this conversation. Again, we're going to chat again, hopefully in a year when you finish that book. But thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon. Thanks again to Torkil. I really had a lot of fun with that. I'm sincere in that I am very interested in utilizing some of these wearables to start to pay attention to my own HRV. I was already really thinking about getting on the market for an Oura Ring. And after this one, he's convinced me that maybe the Garmin is the one that I want, especially because I'm interested in that day-to-day data. I'm interested in knowing what's going on with my nutrition. As I mentioned, it's, to me, one of the biggest gaps that so many people have within their nutrition. We don't know what foods are causing these sensitivity issues. And if you have the data immediately right there, yes, definitely you're having a systemic effect from the pizza you're eating. You're actually way too elevated heart rate to go to sleep, and that's why you're getting bad sleeps. This would shift my whole depiction on my habits as well. It's what motivates me to go for steps. And I didn't have a step tracker. I would say just over 5 years ago, maybe a bit more. When I did my first bodybuilding show, I didn't. And if I would have known that I was that, I don't want to say lazy, but just that sedentary, I would have been motivated to do something about it. And as I mentioned, now that I have that reinforcement, I'm only at 5K, I better go for a walk. Even today, when I went for a walk with my dogs, yeah, I was kind of short on time, but I was like, you know what? If I just go an extra 10 minutes, I know I don't got to worry about too many more steps today. And it motivates you. So I really think that this is going to change the game for a lot of people. I do understand how overwhelming that might be from the perception that he's got 5 wearables on. He's got like 3 rings. He's got 2 wristbands. But as he mentioned, it's his job. And it's my job to be really fascinated with this stuff. For you as an individual, you got to think about what's the biggest return on investment. I would personally recommend you get one. The lowest hanging fruit is always going to be a step counter. I think we didn't discuss it, but I would always say that's the lowest hanging fruit. Make sure you're getting enough steps. And technically, you could use your phone. Phones are actually pretty accurate for it. I feel like they're so accurate that they're not forgiving. Like if you're not putting it in your pocket, and it's going to be like just you're only getting 6K, and maybe a wrist worn would have given you 8K. But if you're just looking for low-hanging fruit, I would recommend you start there and then try to get even something off Amazon. As he mentioned, he was actually pretty happy with the Fitbit. And those are much more affordable. They're less invasive as like a giant, watch, some of these things. As he had mentioned, the difference between Garmin and Oura. I think one of the things with the Oura ring is the ring. It's a ring. It's not a wrist worn. I personally actually like the wrist worn because the wrist worn, I like to tell time. I use the stopwatch on it, but I don't like the big Apple. I think it's very blocky. As he mentioned too, it's like not even inherently worth it. It just kind of sells because it's got the name brand. And I did want to ask him more about the calorie part, which I just forgot, and we got into more of the conversation. But just so you know, that those trackers do not track calories very well. I don't know how you would feel about all of the other ones, but the odds are they don't track very well because the body is very adaptive on metabolism, and you can't tell if you're adaptive on metabolism because it can't track that. But knowing if you're recovering well, knowing if your body is having, a sensitivity reaction to the food you're eating, knowing if you're getting enough steps, knowing if your HRV score is actually coming down, these things are all going to produce better health and better function anyways. And so from there, are you burning enough calories? Like the step count, I think, is that number, right? It's not the exact calories that you're burning, but are you burning enough to just be metabolically healthy? And there's a difference. I call it metabolically healthy, and I call it metabolically unhealthy. If you're only getting like 3K steps a day, I think that's a negative metabolic health outcome. Not for everyone, because some people can actually just be that genetic disposition where it doesn't affect them. But for those of us who are having a hard time losing weight, that is likely going to be metabolically unhealthy. You get to 6 to 8K, and then you're in line with the numbers that are probably going to produce long-term health outcomes that are beneficial. So some people try to say that the 10K step day thing was just kind of a marketing campaign, which it might have been, but it's pretty fucking close to the data. So I don't know why you fight it. It's a guy named David Asprey who always fights it. And he's a biohacker and stuff like that. And I think I understand the point of not everything that you understand in fitness. Some things are myths and stuff like that, but it's like that's just a slight overshot. It's like the 1 gram per pound of body weight. 1 gram per pound of body weight is an overshot of protein. It absolutely is. It's probably closer to 0.7 or 0.8. It's probably closer to your lean mass number. But most people have a hard time getting in for that 1 gram. And if you just want to hedge your bets and make sure you're maintaining and improving your muscle mass to the best of your ability, you go for 1 gram. But it doesn't mean you have to. And so coming back to the 10K step thing, it's just a good standard for people to have. And if people like, oh, maybe I should do more cardio, just do more steps, just walk more. You know, I rant about this all the time. So I'll leave you on that, leave that to the side. The wearables, I think, are a cool new age. Now, I will fully be honest that I think he goes down the rabbit hole because it's his job, and I wouldn't go as far as a CGM. I say that currently with where I'm at in my life, the affordability of one, but I also just don't know if I need one. And I wouldn't, likely unless a client was pre-diabetic or diabetic, would I ever encourage one? Because I think you can get a lot of those symptoms, like pay attention to them. As I mentioned, when I had my higher visceral fat number, I noticed that possibly I was having blood sugar issues. Like I was more hungry. And then that went away because of one of my deficits. So I didn't need the CGM to tell me I was eating better. I knew I was, right? And once I started eating better and I lost weight, my appetite got regulated. So I don't think we have to go down there. I personally am not at the point in my life where I need to go down the rabbit hole of CGM, but data is interesting for people. And data also does motivate. And I always say, track your way to success. If you're trying to get stronger, I've used an analogy before and I'll use it again. You're trying to get stronger. You went to a gym and the gym had 0 numbers on the weights. It just had objects that were kind of bigger and smaller. You'd be like, am I getting stronger? I think I lifted this kind of big one. I don't remember. Maybe it was this big one. I don't know. I think so, but you wouldn't know. And there's people who are going to the gym with the numbers on the weights and they don't write them down. They don't write their sets and reps and they don't remember what they did. And so how do you know they're getting stronger? They don't even know, right? They just maybe not. And so this is what data can do for you. And I think it is the new age we live in. You got to choose what's right for you as far as a level of data that you're willing to upkeep and whether or not you find it motivating or not. I think when it comes to these things that, get missed, it's valuable. I think it really is. The step counter alone, super valuable for most people. That's a standard that I really encourage people from step 1 is to get more steps. And then from there, a trackable that can actually track your sleep. That's, again, going to be motivating for you to be like, I better get to sleep earlier. And it's motivating for me. Like, I see my sleep scores. It's like, man, I got to do a better job. Like, it's work to not do stuff, ironically, when it comes to sleep. It's hard work to go to bed disciplined, go to bed earlier than you think you need to. You can't get up later for the most part in our lives, right? It's the work to get to bed earlier that really matters. And those sleep scores can really be motivating. And then the HRV scores. And, currently I'm doing a powerlifting and it's motivating to make sure I go to bed early. So I really hope you found this valuable. I hope that you really look at, maybe I should get a Garmin. I'm looking at the Garmin, maybe an Oura Ring. The Whoop strap actually looked like it might have some really interesting things because it's subtle. It's not an actual watch. So maybe you're interested in that, but going down that rabbit hole could be worth it. And he has a great book that goes into it very deeply. So if you want to know, and I'll probably be looking at the book as well to understand this data better and how I can make these decisions based on the information it gives me. So go check out his stuff. I'll leave all of his information in the show notes if you want to go check him out on Instagram. And I really recommend that if you're interested in it, just make a play. Just go get one and let that be the motivator for you to have more change in your life. Thanks so much for checking out the episode today. I really appreciate you as a listener. As always, please share this if you know anyone that's really interested in tracking data or needs motivation to start tracking data. That could be the thing that really gets them over the edge. And I just always appreciate you as a listener. Thank you for spending your time and listening to these stories, because I'm trying to help you chase your own ambitions, because we know life is not about the pursuit of happiness, but rather the happiness within your pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.